Hello everyone and welcome to Class 6 Media Economics, and this is our mass media and or electronic media class. And just a quick reminder that before this class we had test 1. So this class doesn't come under test 1, this class will be under test 2. You're on your own while you're watching these at home, but just remember that the notes you take off of these PowerPoint slides will be for test 2 and not for test 1. Hope you did well on the test, and if you haven't taken the test, you should probably take it before watching this class, this PowerPoint slide lecture. All right, so let's dive into media economics. And so the first thing I usually do in this class is I show a clip from the Coen brothers' wonderful film, The Hudsucker Proxy, and I would recommend that you do that right now. Okay, I've linked to it. It's in the module. It's in the very next one. So go leave this, click on it, watch it. It's fun. It's all of 4 minutes, 5 minutes, and then come on back. These are all clips, and this four-way screen is from the Hudsucker Proxy. And if you have watched it, what economic concept does the Hudsucker Proxy illustrate? And you should know quite easily that it is supply and demand. We see the hula hoops, and they're not selling very well, and the price drops, and then they start selling, and the price goes up, up. Right? So supply and demand, easy concept in economics. This isn't an economics class, it's an economics lecture here, so we're not going to get too deep into all this kind of stuff. And a lot of it you should probably already know from high school, including monopoly. Okay, that's an easy one. You learned monopoly. I don't know where in high school, but I'm sure you've learned it. But we're just as a review, so we're all on the same page. A single firm dominates production and distribution. That's not quite spelled right, sorry about that. Distribution in a particular industry. We don't have too many monopolies today, but there are probably a couple. I would say Google is very, very close to being a monopoly for search engines. I know there are a couple of others. There's Yahoo and there's Bing and there's a few others, but it's pretty close to a monopoly. And that's the way things were in the golden age of monopolies at the turn of the last century. And Standard Oil, John D. Rockefeller and Standard Oil had a monopoly. Andrew Carnegie and U.S. Steel was a real monopoly back then. There was J.P. Morgan and banking. J.P. Morgan was so rich that he bailed out the United States Treasury. Okay, there was a depression, recession, I'm not sure how bad it got, and the government was in bad shape, and he and a few of his rich buddies bailed out the U.S. Economy, the U.S. Treasury. So during the golden age of monopolies, they were pretty darn rich people, that's for sure. And there are a few others, sailing, railroads, things like that. I love the History Channel, and there are some wonderful documentaries on the History Channel. One of them that I saw was talking about these American titans, and a couple of things that I kind of had misunderstood or didn't remember quite right, I guess, through all this. Rockefeller was Standard Oil, but it wasn't the oil for that would get refined into gasoline for automobiles, because automobiles weren't really around very much yet in 1900. His was all about kerosene and some heating oil, but most about kerosene for lights, all those gas lamps and things like that that were out there. Gasoline was thrown away. It was once you refined oil and got kerosene, then the gasoline was kind of a byproduct, and it kind of got tossed away. So they were encouraging automobiles and the internal combustion engine, because then they could get rid of this gasoline that they had previously just tossed. probably in the river, who knows. But anyway, that's a bit of a side point. The other thing is when Teddy Roosevelt and some of the other trust busters came in to break up the trusts, Rockefeller had to break up Standard Oil, and they became a bunch of sort of mini oil companies, and he had to sell a lot of that stuff off. He didn't want to sell off his various oil companies around. A lot of it was like in Ohio and Pennsylvania and places like that, a little bit in Oklahoma, but oil hadn't really been a big deal in the Middle East or the rest of the world. Anyway, he had to sell all this stuff off, and when he was done, he had $600 billion, if I'm remembering this right. Yeah, $600 billion. And today, the richest person on the planet has maybe, I think Jeff Bezos has maybe $150 billion, something like that. So Rockefeller was 3 or 4 times richer than the richest person on the planet today, and that's how rich some of these barons were back then. Andrew Carnegie, and like I said, and J.P. Morgan, and some of these other companies, they got incredibly wealthy. Okay, anyway, we still have some monopolies. Like I said, maybe you can think of some others. Maybe there's one or two others. Mostly, I think what we have today are oligopolies, where there's a few. There's a few video games, right? Maybe 3 or 4 companies that do video games. We've got, as we've talked already in our last class about movies, there are 5 media companies. So that would be an oligopoly. There's really only one of those 5. Disney and Warner's and Comcast and so on. Only about 5. That's an oligopoly. Not a lot of competition in a lot of our industries. And even in social media, Facebook, Twitter, right? There's not that many. Even social media companies, 4 or 5, maybe 3. So a lot of oligopolies today, a lot. Economies of scale, and we've talked about this, I think, in class 1 when we were talking about the penny press and how it became much cheaper to make, to print newspapers, right? All these giant machines, I think they were run by steam back in the 1850s and so on. They would have been steam driven, but big giant presses making papers, and when you make papers on a large scale like that, you can drop the price and they can be only a penny and you can still make a profit. And so on. Economies of scale runs all the way through our class when we get up to other technologies like radios, which are going to start off pretty expensive and then get pretty cheap, and televisions, which are going to start off very expensive and get pretty cheap. And even when we convert to flat screen TVs, 15 years ago they were maybe a couple $1,000s, and today they're a few $100, maybe $400, $500, $600 for a nice 55-inch flat screen TV. So in a lot of cases, the prices are dropping. I bought a CD player many years ago, and it was $500, and it had 5 slots in it, and it would also play DVDs and all that. And you know, lately you could buy probably a CD player or a DVD player for $30 or $40 or $50, something like that. Even Blu-ray players are under like $100. So in a lot of cases, economies of scale have dropped a lot of prices. They certainly haven't dropped the price of our smartphones, though, have they? Still hovering around $1,000 for iPhone. I think my iPhone 10 Plus was $1,200, something like that. Dear God, I'm making monthly payments on my bill, right? $30, $40 a month. But yeah, that's a lot of money. That's like a computer. You know, that's like a whole computer right there, which I guess it is. And here I throw up this example about a hamburger. And if we think that we want to make a hamburger, or say 1 hamburger, we have to go and buy some ground beef and probably a pound of ground beef, even though we only need maybe a 1/4 of a pound. We have to buy some buns, and probably a 6-pack of buns. I think they come in packs of 6 or 8. If we want some lettuce, then you have to buy a head of lettuce in most cases. I jar of ketchup or a bottle of ketchup, bottle of mustard, maybe relish. I don't know what you take on your hamburger, mayo, all that stuff. But mostly you're buying a whole jar, the smallest jar you can find for all of that, and that's going to cost you a little bit of money just for one hamburger. It's probably not much more to make 6 hamburgers than it is to make one hamburger. It's probably about the same price if you think about it. And so if you are McDonald's and you are making billions and billions and billions of hamburgers, you're going to get a pretty good price. You're going to go to, I don't know, the Cattlemen's Association or whatever, and say, we want to buy metric tons, enough ground beef to fill rooms and rooms and rooms, okay? I know they don't sell it by the roomful, but if we can imagine all those billions of hamburgers and how much ground beef that must be, they can drive a pretty hard bargain, and they can ask for a really, really good price, and they can still make a profit, and the cattlemen can still make a profit when you have that giant scale. And the same thing for Walmart, right? How can they have all these, such great deals? Because they're going to drive a real hard bargain. They're going to go to the manufacturers of flat screen TVs and say, yes, we're Walmart and we need thousands and thousands of those things. Give us a good price on them. Okay. So anyway, economies of scale. It's a big deal. It really runs economies of the world. That's for sure. And here we have what looks to be, I'm guessing this is maybe Apple in China somewhere. I got it off the internet, a Google image, and I can't remember what it said now, but I think this was an Apple factory in China. Okay, so we have also talked through the semester, so here we are again, government economic policy and regulation, and there is a bit of a pendulum, right? It sort of goes back and forth. In the early 20th century, Teddy Roosevelt, the trust buster, broke up the monopolies. There we go, Standard Oil, railroads, all that sort of thing. And then, not that many years later, Ronald Reagan decided to break up the air traffic controllers union. They went on strike over wages. They wanted the same wages as the pilots were getting, as it turns out. Maybe a bit of a reach on their part. And Reagan declared it, I don't know, an essential industry and run by the government, and said, you're not allowed to strike. This is, we have planes in the air, and this is for safety and all that. And he fired them all. He fired them all. So who was in those traffic control towers? Well, supervisors, right? Supervisors didn't go on strike. So supervisors and people like that, and some that crossed the picket line. And then it was chaos for a little while, a few days. And then they trained people and broke up that union, right? So that is the government, regulating and deregulating and regulating and deregulating, sort of back and forth, pro-labor, pro-business, pro-labor, pro-business. It kind of goes back and forth through the years. The Telecom Act of 1996, and we will talk about this a couple more times when we get into computing, especially restrictions on how many TV and radio stations one company could own, and it permitted phone companies to buy and compete with cable and satellite companies. So for a while, I was getting my cable, I guess you'd call it cable TV, but it was from a phone company, Verizon. Right? So Verizon was giving me my cable TV for a while. And it was supposed to encourage and increase competition, and prices were supposed to drop. I never saw it. I don't think anybody did. You can ask your parents. But it didn't seem to drop prices, but it was deregulated. It did help out, and we'll talk about this when we get into the computing side of things toward the end of the semester, that it dropped phone rates, Okay, it dropped phone rates from maybe 10 cents a minute to 2 or 3 cents a minute. And at the time, a lot of people were connecting to the internet on phone lines called dial-up. And we're going to talk about all that later. But it dropped the price of being on the internet by quite a bit. So one of the impacts of all that. And again, government stepping in. And the last time we talked about this, if you remember, the government stepped in to help out magazines, Postal Act, so that magazines could be sent through the mail at a much cheaper price. So, like I said, sometimes the government can sort of deregulate and help out, and sometimes they can regulate, and maybe the prices might go a little higher. One thing, it's kind of a philosophical question, and I don't want to come down on one side or the other. Democrats in general tend to think that government needs to regulate things, and cars need to be safer, so maybe they should have airbags and seatbelts. Water should be cleaner, air should be cleaner, and there should be more regulation. Republicans in general tend to think that things will work out on their own. The government should get out of the way and let innovation and industry flourish, and overregulation can muck everything up. Okay, so that's kind of in general. And the pendulum tends to swing back and forth, back and forth. We wouldn't have safe cars and airbags if it weren't for government regulation. On the other hand, small business owners, rightfully so, complain about stacks of regulations that they have to go through just to open up a coffee shop. Right? If you're going to open up a coffee shop, and how many customers are you going to have, and there have to be that many parking spaces available, and all of your workers and W-2 forms and all that kind of stuff. And all I wanted to do was open up a coffee shop, and all this government regulation is forcing me to, waste half my time filling out paperwork and all that. So they both have a point. I have to say they both have a point. Usually somewhere in the middle is kind of where things work best. You can under-regulate and over-regulate, and usually somewhere in the middle is where things tend to work out well. Okay, anyway, enough philosophy on the government and regulation. We have two ways of paying for things in general. In broad general terms, there are two ways to pay for things in media and mostly in media. Okay, so direct payment means there is no advertising. You directly pay for it. Books, movies, cable TV, although cable TV can have ads. Yes, I know that. Perhaps maybe more like HBO would be a better example. Streaming, Netflix, right? You pay for it. There are no ads on Netflix for the most part because you paid for it. And music, if you buy a CD, right? Old school, go out and buy a CD, then you own that CD and there's no ads or anything like that. Now I know in music streaming services you can have ads, or you can pay a little bit of money and not have ads. So I'm aware of that, but sort of talking old school here. But on the other hand, we have indirect payment. And that means advertisers are helping keep the costs down. So all those TV programs and all those salaries for the directors and the actors and all those people and the writers and radio and all that, newspapers, magazines, the price is kept down because there are ads, and we would have to pay more money. A newspaper might be $2 or $3, $4 per day rather than 50 cents or $1, something like that. And the same thing goes for magazines and television. We kind of know how much television would cost through subscriptions and things like that. The big impact for most of us is on the internet. Okay, we get our social media basically supported by advertising, so we don't have to pay for Facebook or for Twitter and some of those things, and the same thing goes for Facebook. I'm sorry, for Google and all of that, right? So we get to do. What if we had to pay 3 cents per search? Okay, that would probably add up. but we get to do our searching, and we get to do our tweeting, and we get to do our posting and our liking pretty much for free. And that is because indirect payment involving advertising. Okay. A little bit about corporations and public and private. If you want to go public, the reason for going public is that's how you can raise a lot of money, by selling shares of stock in your company. Okay, so, and I've got these examples here, Apple and CNN, and I'll get to that. But when you want to raise a lot of money, then you go public, and the government is going to regulate that because they don't want people to be buying stock in worthless companies. Okay, so companies are going to have to have board members representing the community. Okay, board members are going to represent the community. They're supposed to protect shareholders, and that you don't run your company into the ground or anything like that. It still happens, of course, but a lot less frequently thanks to oversight. The chief executive officer, the CEO, chairman of the board. And so if you are the person that founded the company in your garage, like Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, then you own a part of that company. Hopefully you will be voted as the CEO and you can run things as you want to run things. But if you push in the direction that the shareholders don't like, maybe you're borrowing too much money, maybe you are not innovating fast enough, and they are not receiving dividends. A lot of companies, shareholders like to get dividends every year. And so you can be fired. Okay, you can be fired if you are not running Apple or CNN the way the board, and these are all white old men, and that's on purpose. That's very much on purpose. I didn't do that accidentally. That's very much on purpose. Kind of old school, but it kind of makes a point, I think, also. Sadly, too few people of color and females on many, many boards. So, yeah, these are all old white men making a statement there. If you don't have a controlling interest in your company, and Steve Jobs and Wozniak, they sold enough shares so that maybe they had a 20% interest in the company. Now you raise hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars, right? So Steve Jobs and Ted Turner, and they became billionaires when they went public, and they have what they call instant billionaires. When Facebook or Apple, something like that, a lot of early workers, right, code writers that get in when they're literally in a garage, and the founders will say, well, we can't pay you much, but we'll give you stock, right? We'll give you stock, and when we go public, you'll have shares of stock. And right now we're in a garage, so cross your fingers, because most of the time companies that start in garages don't go anywhere, frankly. They don't go anywhere, and you didn't get paid, right? Your stock is worthless. But if you're lucky and you were on the ground floor at Facebook or Apple or some of these places, Twitter, places like that, then that stock that you were paid in back in the early days, when they go public, right, they're going to say, we're going to go public. And what happens when a company goes public is the banks and other people look at your company, they look at your books, they look at your sales, they look at projections, and they say, based on all this material and all these projections, we believe that if you're going to sell 100,000, or if you're going to put out 100,000 shares to the general public, that each share should be worth $10, for instance, right? Each share should be worth $10. And so if you were paid in stock and you've got so many thousands of shares of stock, as soon as they go public, you could be a billionaire, right? You could be a billionaire, or certainly a millionaire, right? Because they went public. You were paid in future, basically paid in future earnings. So that happens. It has happened in all of those companies, right? It happened at Apple, and happened at Facebook and Google. Google, lots of instant millionaires and instant billionaires, secretaries, all sorts of people, because they joined a company that could have gone under at any minute. And they weren't even paid in money. How are you going to pay the rent, right? They weren't even paid in money. They were paid in shares of stock. So anyway, that's a little bit about, and you'll notice that I didn't put all this stuff in PowerPoint slides or any of that, and that's okay, right? I just wanted to go over that for you. All that is not going to be on the test or anything like that. I hope you learn something from all that, and maybe understand how companies are run from all that, but I'm not going to be quizzing you on all of that. Okay, only what's on PowerPoint there. So, and here is that same slide that we looked at last time in our last class. So again, 5 media conglomerates. We're going to grab, copy, and paste. Or drag and drop, I guess. We're gonna grab all this 20th century film stuff and drag it over and drop it onto the Disney side. A fellow instructor does this, so he sort of started on some of this. I see what he did, and Fox News and some of the other stuff is still back at Fox, but Disney got that. So basically, there are 5 big media conglomerates today. I love this, okay, because Simpsons at Fox now is under Disney. So there's Rupert Murdoch, he's gone, okay, our new corporate overlords and all that. So they're having a little bit of fun with it, okay, having a little bit of fun with all that. Kind of cheeky, they love to put them on, and that's okay. I'm sure they make plenty of money for their corporate parents. Synergy. And we talked about this with movies. It's important. We're going to go over it again. It promotes how you promote and sell different versions of your media product across subsidiaries. So in the case of Disney, they can promote their movies at their theme parks. They can promote their theme parks at their movies, networks, and so on. And they started off with just Mickey Mouse cartoons, 7-minute Mickey Mouse cartoons. They went off into documentaries. They made live action features like Mary Poppins, things like that. The Absent-Minded Professor. Theme parks, about that same period, 1955 for Disneyland. TV networks, ABC and ESPN and all that. Disney really didn't become this corporate behemoth until the 90s, the 80s and 90s. They were just this little Disney animation live action theme park company for the longest time, and they didn't start gobbling up all these Marvel and Lucas and Pixar till very recently. Very recent. Marvel was just a couple years ago. Okay, anyway, synergy. But I want to talk about cultural imperialism because this is a big part of media, okay, and it's pretty important. So this is imperialism, good old-fashioned military imperialism, the kind that Great Britain was so good at. They controlled about a quarter of the world at one time. We know that we got our independence from the British. They had Canada still, Australia still, India, right? India, and big chunks of Africa and the Middle East and the Far East. And that is imperialism with guns, right? That's imperialism with guns and all that kind of stuff. Cultural imperialism is taking, you might say, territory with culture. Okay, so it's not guns, and that's a cool thing. But American culture or Western culture, and Western culture would include like France and Italy and so on. The Western world is Western Europe and us as a part of that, right? An offshoot of Western Europe, founded by Western Europeans. So that when they talk about Western, that's what they're talking about. They're not talking about cowboys and all that stuff. Anyway, so our movies are very popular movies going back Charlie Chaplin, hugely popular, the most famous person on the planet. Our music, our rock and roll music coming out in the 1950s with the Beatles and Elvis and all that kind of stuff, and going on up through hip hop and so on. Today, our Game of Thrones is a worldwide hit, all over the whole, over the whole world. Lots of our TV shows, Friends, all that stuff. Our food, McDonald's, hamburgers, French fries, all that stuff. Coke, Coca-Cola, right? These are all big American institutions. Okay, our fashion, right? Whatever kinds of fashions, baseball hats, even. Okay, backwards baseball hats, all that stuff, right? All that is our culture, and it is gobbling up most of the culture on the planet, right? Cultural imperialism, going over the whole world. Now, it's certainly not at what they used to call the point of a sword or a gun or anything like that. It's what they call soft power, okay, soft power. But it's still, it is a form of imperialism. There are wonderful cultures all over the whole planet. And if you start losing your culture, it's maybe not a good thing. So part of that, offshoot of that, is cultural appropriation. Okay, we can take American culture, our cowboys and our McDonald's hamburgers and things like that. But what if we take culture from another country, another area of the world, and assimilate it? Okay, are we appropriating other people's cultures? Rice-a-roni, right? Are we appropriating other people's cultures? So here we have, okay, by Panther. These styles were from Africa. They were tweaked and changed, but they were African styles, African patterns, all that kind of stuff from certain parts of Africa, and they were put in an American movie. We appropriated that culture for our benefit, or Disney's benefit, okay, Marvel's benefit. We appropriated that culture. Now, in a sense, you're paying homage to it. You're sort of honoring it, and not ignoring it, okay? And that part of it is a good thing. So are we assimilating that culture or appropriating it, taking it, right? And are they getting paid for their culture and all that, right? This all raises lots and lots of questions, lots and lots of questions. What is beautiful? Okay, these three beautiful African women, African American women, okay, but who decides what's beautiful? Okay, well, culture, for a big part of that, decides what beauty is. And so here we have the Barbie doll and the human Barbie doll with lots of surgery and things like that, and so on. So is beautiful thin and tall and blue-eyed and curvy, right? And all that, blonde, right? Is that what the world standard of beauty is? Taylor Swift, okay? Is that the world standard for beauty? Okay, the Barbie doll. And people call out Mattel on that, and they call out on that, right? Asians, Africans don't naturally have blue eyes, blonde hair, all that kind of stuff. And so does that mean that you can't be beautiful if you're Asian? Does it mean you can't be beautiful if you are African or Hispanic even, right? With not bright white skin. Okay, but media for so long, Marilyn Monroe and all that, tells us that that is what is beautiful. Media is doing that. So Mattel has awakened, I guess you could say, a few years ago now. It's a few years ago. And they came out with a line of Barbie dolls. My wife, I might have mentioned, my wife is Asian. She is Thai. And in an antique shop, we found Thai Barbie, which is kind of interesting. She doesn't look very Asian. I think it was done 20 or 30 years ago. But her skin is a little darker, and her hair is black, and she is Thai Barbie, so that was kind of funny. We grabbed that. But here we see, okay, here we see different skin colors, different body types, and all that. okay, on Barbie. So, Mattel, to their credit, they gave it a shot, okay? And, if you are taught these things when you are uh, very, very young, little boys, little girls, and all that, can boys play with Barbie dolls, all that? Now we get into the whole gender gender politics and things like that. Can girls play with toy guns and things, and GI Joes, and can little boys play with Barbies and all that kind of stuff? Does Barbie have to have a male friend? Could Barbie have a girlfriend? All that kind of stuff, right? But kids are 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and they're kind of learning about the world with their toys. Right? They're learning about the world with their toys, and so we might seem kind of silly. Oh, it's just a doll. Okay, it's just a toy. But you're very impressionable at 4. Very impressionable at 4, and you're going to, take a lot away. That's what's going to sort of form the kind of person you are. And again, this is coming from the media. It's coming from the media, okay, and advertising and business. Yeah, I mean, Barbie's not a network, but it still comes through the media, advertisements, all that kind of stuff. Let's look at some more. This is actually kind of fun. The more I got into it, the more I started having a little bit of fun. I went online to find some McDonald's menus. And for a while, we were talking about cultural appropriation. So who's appropriating who? Is India appropriating? Now, this is an American company, so McDonald's corporate offices are going to be making the money. But here we have 3 burgers, and there is no beef in any of this. There's no beef. Hindus, I think it's 75 or 80% of Indians are Hindu. The other 20% are Muslim. And here we have bean and naan and chili and chicken, right? So here we have these McDonald's. They're not going to sell very many regular hamburgers in India, and they didn't want to sell to a small market or a niche market, so they adapted. They appropriated some Indian culture, and India appropriated some American culture. Okay, so I think if it's done right, it's not bad. I know that when Mexicans, not Mexican Americans, but when Mexicans come to America on vacation and they go to Taco Bell, they say, this isn't Mexican food. We don't have this in Mexico. What do you think this is Mexican food? This isn't Mexican food. Okay, or nothing like we have. It's much more bland and all the whole rest of it. So most countries are going to take a culture and adapt it a bit, right? Americans don't tend to like spicy stuff. Okay, so if you're going to try to make things with chili and things with spicy food, all that kind of stuff. My wife is Thai. I mentioned that. Thai food is very, very spicy. But if you go to a restaurant, a Thai restaurant in the U.S., run by Thai people, they're going to kind of have an American type menu. And if you are Thai, then you can say, make it, our way. Something like that, right? So when my wife goes to a Thai restaurant, she can speak Thai to them, and they will make it appropriately spicy, and it's very good. And there are curries, right? India has all these wonderful curries. They're very, very spicy and all that. So if you go to Indian restaurants and so on in America, Mexican restaurants in America, things like that, Chinese restaurants in America, Chinese people barely recognize Chinese food in American restaurants. You take a person from China into Panda Kitchen, and they're barely going to recognize any of that. And that's okay. That's okay, right? Most of the people are not going to be Chinese that are going to go to a Panda Kitchen. Most of the people are going to be maybe Chinese American or non-Chinese at all, right? And so you got to make food for that audience, that clientele. Let's go to another one here. Here we have McDonald's menu in China. Okay, and Not exactly sure. Probably rice in there and fried. Okay, lots of fried stuff. They're kind of big on the fried stuff. I have to say, I think the world loves. I know the world likes pizza, depending on the toppings, but French fries, just about anywhere in the world, everybody seems to love French fries. I'll tell you, deep fried, greasy goodness for everybody. Um, Cokes, things like that. When I go to Asia, I don't really like the kind of orange juice that they drink in Thailand or Vietnam. It's too sweet for my tastes. So they have orange juice, right? You go to a hotel and you're over there visiting. You go to a hotel and you go to the breakfast buffet, and their type of orange juice, it doesn't appeal to me. So how stuff is flavored and spiced and all that around the world, even if it's McDonald's or Panda Kitchen or whatever. So again, we're talking about media, cultural appropriation, assimilation. Okay, now there's kind of a dark side to all this, and that is the doll test. And it's a real test. You can Google it. If you have a paper you need to write, if you have a term paper you need to write, because it was pretty controversial. And the doll test, administered by African Americans and so on, and they got the random sample, and they got little African American boys and girls, and they chose the light-skinned dolls without any prompting, right? Which one do you want to play with and all that? And they chose the light-skinned dolls. And it was troubling, to be sure. Maybe not shocking, but certainly troubling that they weren't picking dolls closer to their own skin color. But it really was a test. It really did happen. Most people talk about the media's role in all this. Also, fairly troubling, and this is, you can Google it. It's not just me with the anecdotal, but there are lots of skin whitening pastes and formulas and things like that in India and in Asia. And lighter-skinned people in India get the jobs in the media, they get the jobs in modeling, they get the jobs as secretaries and things like that. So lots of Indians, especially from the southern part of the subcontinent, have darker skin, and they have lots and lots of skin whitening creams and things like that, and in Asia as well. And you will see lots of people in Asia, in these incredibly hot countries where it's 90 degrees, and they're out in the rice fields, and they are covered from head to toe. They got the big cone hat on, maybe gloves, long sleeves. They don't want to get any darker than they are. And I just saw an article about India and skin bleaching, right? They have skin bleaching. Mostly people start with the face and hands, okay, what they can afford, and then arms and upper body and so on. And it's quite popular in India. Sad to say, it's really hard to make your way into a decent paying job. I know in India in particular, based on the color of their skin. And I think a lot of that is culture. Okay, so media convergence. Media is converging. We're getting so much, right? We're getting our payment, cameras, music, books, more music, GPS, video, okay, all out of one device. And that's really something. That's really something. And that means there is trouble for all of these industries, right? The magazine industry and the music industry will come up on that. We've already talked about newspapers and paywalls and all that kind of stuff. And media convergence, it's really the big overarching topic, that and mass production for our class. Lots of, I've been reading a bit about people who work in the tech industries, You think, oh, I finally have a job at Apple or Google or Facebook, and I live in San Francisco, and I make lots and lots of money, and what a wonderful life this is, and I'm doing good and connecting people and getting information to people, connecting friend to friend with Facebook, and helping people get information with Google. And after a while, I'm starting to read that people are souring on the whole idea because it seems like they have to increase signups in order to collect user data, to sell more ads, to meet Wall Street expectations, to appease shareholders, to increase the stock price, right? Who cares about connecting people? Who cares about searching for information? We care about increasing our stock price. And so lots of people working in digital media are leaving some of the big companies, and they're maybe finding some smaller boutique type companies that maybe are better at walking the walk and talking the talk. There has been recent controversy about Mark Zuckerberg's refusal to correct or censor tweets from certain important Americans and things like that, and presenting facts rather than rumor and innuendo and all of that. And lots of people, tech industry was kind of the big thing and very popular and loved to get in it, and they get paid so well. But the social conscience of some of the workers and the tech companies leaves much to be desired if it really doesn't matter that you are helping people find information or connecting with each other, and it's just all about the bottom line. So again, media economics, that is it for us for today, and join us next time. I have no idea what class number 7 is, but I'm sure it's a good one. I think we get into radio. It seems to me we're going to get into radio next. So anyway, until then, take care.